Jon Collins and I'm Head of Consultancy at Maydencroft.
I'm Lottie Miles, Senior Landscape Consultant at Maydencroft.
John and Lottie, thanks for talking to the Affinity Water podcast series this spring 2023. We're going to take a look at the English country garden and how fashions and trends are changing to plant plants this spring which are more tolerant to hot weather and dry conditions. But first, can you explain to our listeners where we are, John?
Yes, we are at Maydencroft Manor near Hitchin, which is our head office and home of our company. It's a fantastic place, like the manor itself, and surrounds date back way 1400s, probably longer ago than that. And now we run our farm from here and our consultancy business. And we're currently standing across from a huge number of cows in our sheds that are being very politely quiet for us, which is nice of them.
Yeah, no sound effect yet, but they are nibbling away at the straw. Lottie, explain the association between Affinity Water and Maydencroft.
So we are Affinity Water's ecological framework contractors. That means we are able to provide advice to them about ecology, so when they're doing projects to ensure that they meet the supply demand of their residents, that they do so with the benefit of wildlife.
John, in terms of Maydencroft, you give all types of advice, including to Affinity Water, but also to commercial landscape gardeners, to new developers, and to gardeners themselves and their own homes.
Yeah, absolutely. We're probably on the largest scale of things, but then it also kind of has a further reach and influence. And I think we see our role very much in the stewardship end of the spectrum. You know, we're all passionate about the environment, passionate about biodiversity, and trying to influence landscape as much as we can. And that does come down to garden owners as well, and people who actually have their own plot of land to manage. How we can influence that. It all kind of connects up to form this big part of our countryside.
And Lottie, are trends changing in terms of what people plant when? How much is climate change and these hot summers and seem like freezing Decembers and Januaries influencing gardens and what people plant?
I think people are becoming a lot more aware about what they're planting, and it definitely seems now that people are more interested in planting native species that are suitable for a wide range of wildlife. And with the hot summers we are having, we have to think about drought-tolerant species that will survive without too much watering, and also allowing our grass to just not be watered and maybe go a bit browner than we would like.
Well, we'll come back to grass. That will make a few gardeners in our region cringe. But John, we're standing in front of these cows. Just tell me a little bit about Maydencroft and husbandry.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things of Maydencroft is we have this association with the English Longhorns, which are a native breed of cattle. And this goes back a long time with our MD's father, and we've always had them as our conservation tools. So we do conservation grazing for kind of wildflower meadows and grassland sites, and they are by far the best conservation tool you can have. The way they graze, the way they it's so much better than using machinery. But the farmers.
So the cows. Let's spool back on that. So the cows actually do the job that machinery can do.
Just so much better. They do the work for us because it's the way they graze and the way they can push through scrub and the way they manage the landscape. If you imagine the way the landscape would have been managed years and years ago before people even ever started to do it. And this is almost where a lot of our work and the work of our other consultancies, the work of our professionals is moving towards this kind of natural sculpting of the landscape based on animals, essentially. You would have heard the term rewilding and things like that. So actually our longhorn cattle do that approach.
And that also feeds into biodiversity. Can you explain what you mean by biodiversity, Lottie?
I suppose what we mean is just to try and create as much variety in our landscape as possible, because the more different type of habitats we have, that can support a wider range of species such as birds, insects, mammals. So we want to try and get as many species, habitats as possible to really improve our native land around us.
And that would be true even if you've got pots on a patio as well as a large garden and a large lawn. It doesn't matter how small the space is, your little pot on the patio can still attract butterflies and bees.
Yes, absolutely. You don't have to have a lot of space. I've seen people introduce water into their gardens by having an old sink and putting water-loving plants in that to create a mini pond almost. So there are ways that everyone can bring more wildlife into their gardens.
Now, John, do you think we're going to get a moo out of these cows? We're standing in front of
If you give
the
one a prod,
longhorns.
it will happen, yeah.
Well, I'm not brave.
They're normally very vocal, but they're being so well behaved. I think it's always lovely food they've got to eat today. So very happy. And we're currently, if you see down the ends here, of our large English longhorns there, they're absolute beauties. Huge animals. We've got some calves in there as well. The bulls out in the fields, but they are fantastic. If I pause you here, our MD's just here who can actually tell you a bit more about the cattle.
Right, okay.
Tom Williams, Managing Director of Maydencroft.
Tom, what a lovely landscape and farm you've got here. Do you know how many acres it is? And can you tell us about your longhorn breed?
Yes, so we've got about 200 native pedigree longhorn cattle, the Maydencroft herd of longhorns, and they graze on different conservation sites all over Hertfordshire. Our farm here is in Hitchin, where they come home in the winter months when the ground is very wet, and we basically graze for nature. So we set specifications for what we think will be best for optimal habitats for wildlife, and then the cattle go out and do what they do best, eating grass and other vegetation.
So if we're driving around Hertfordshire, we might well see some of your herd on the public spaces.
You will, from Bricketwood to Bishop Stortford and Hatfield to Hitchin, they're everywhere.
And John was explaining they're doing the job that tractors and farm machinery would traditionally do.
Yes, absolutely. I guess they're a grounds maintenance service in the natural form.
How long has Maydencroft been providing this service to both commercial interests and the public sector? You were ahead of the curve.
Yes, I set up Maydencroft 15 years ago now, and very proud to be part of what we now view as a green economy, but trying to explain what we did, being responsible for looking after sites for the good of nature back in 2007 and 8 was extremely complicated. It's still a fairly complex thing to explain now, but we do and are involved on all sorts of different types of rural land management across Hertfordshire and beyond.
Now, Affinity Water launched a campaign 2 years ago called Save Water, Save Our Streams, and people can go onto the SOS website and find out about their water use and be educated on how they can use less water and how that in turn helps the environment. Do you think people are more conscious when they garden, when they go out in the summer and look at their lawns going brown? Are they more conscious of the need to not use water in the garden and to plant plants that might survive a hot summer?
Yes, I definitely think it is more in the public consciousness than it was, but we've still got an awfully long way to go. It's terrific to see, certainly if I bring it back to a farming perspective and the impact that it has on everybody's lives in this part of the world. We graze along the Mimram Valley, for example, and it's wonderful to see that some of the meadows that we graze our cattle with are flooded at the moment, and I haven't seen that for years. So there are definite positives.
And if you have a gardening tip, presumably on this big estate, you do have your own, should we say, country kitchen garden. Is there anything that you're planting this year because you think, it will survive the summer?
Yeah, we're acutely conscious of the types of things that we plant around our home and have been for a long time. We don't irrigate in the garden at all. I inherited the home from my parents and they did, but we don't.
And how do you pull that off, so to speak? Did you sort of just ditch the plants that didn't survive last summer and the cold winter? And are you planting olive trees now?
Yes, it's a good question. I don't know whether we are handling it as well as we could. Most of our lawn actually died, and we're in the process of scarifying and reseeding it right now, where it just got so dry in the summer that it just simply didn't recover. But certainly from a planting perspective, we're giving it a great deal of thought, yes.
Okay, well, perhaps we can continue on our tour, and thank you for talking to the Affinity Water podcast series. Can you get a moo out of these cows?
I don't know whether I can ask them to, but yes, we're not doing very well, but thank you so much.
All right, Jon, Lottie, let's continue with our tour. We'll come back to those cows. I'm determined to get them to say something.
When they're being moved, they will move.
Yeah, that's right. Now, we've got a pond coming into sight.
A moat, actually.
A moat.
Even better than a pond.
And how does that help biodiversity. Water is a very important part. Even again, if you've got a patio, putting a little tub of water, the frogs spawn, the newts.
Absolutely, extremely important. I think with water, we just see such a diversity of habitats and micro-habitats, and you'll think about with Affinity Water and all the work on the chalk streams, and when you think of a chalk stream, you have the habitat within the water itself, the gravels.
Oh, how beautiful
the
this is.
Oh, and here we are. This is the fantastic moat. But you have, even looking around here at the moat, you can see all these different types, these pockets of habitat. There are bits of shelter, bits that are open, marginal vegetation. And all of those support their different types of species, different plant species, different invertebrates, different fish, newts, all sorts. So water really is just this fantastic kind of way of getting so much diversity into our environment.
And Lottie, we're also looking at the spring bulbs that are coming up and providing a very optimistic sight that perhaps summer is ahead.
Exactly, and the fact that we've got flowering species so early on is great for pollinators. It means that they can start collecting nectar straight away. It gives us, yes, hope for summer and bright months ahead.
And those tips for gardeners, it's very important that if we're on a large estate like this, we can take home some tips that people can apply to their own garden. Now, would you be brave to tell people not to water their lawn this summer?
I didn't water my lawn last year, and I was getting a bit worried about it, but I was so surprised to see once we did get rain how quickly it came back and it became so lush and green again. So there is that hope that if you don't water it, it will come back and it will survive.
Hand on heart, John, did you water your lawn last summer?
Absolutely did not. No, I had a parched desert for a few months, and then as Lottie said, it came back so quickly. So I was very lucky. My lawn is fine now, and I did no watering. The interesting thing I saw actually, though, you mentioned with the harsh winter, is that in our area there's quite a lot of use of palm trees, cordylines, and things that you may think with the change to a warmer climate would grow very well, but actually we've seen so many of them obliterated with the cold winter.
Yeah, mine died as well, and I optimistically thought, well, let's get a more continental garden.
Interesting, isn't it? So even with those things, it poses a challenge. And I mean, I almost feel like one of the best things we can do as gardeners is really focus on the things that want to be there and are almost self-propagating. So the plants that I really like in my garden, Verbena bonariensis, beautiful, tall, rigid stems with purple flowers, great for butterflies, great for bees, and just seeds everywhere. It comes up, seeds everywhere, you can move them around, replant them, give them to your friends, fantastic. And another one is Pulmonaria, which is I really love. Came from my mum's garden actually, and I've taken it everywhere I've gone because, again, seeds by itself has these fantastic leaves in summer, big kind of spotty leaves, and then in this time of year when you've got the daffodils and bulbs coming out, have these amazing displays of pink and purple flowers. They're really beautiful, quite discreet, but they just thrive, and they like shady spots as well, and that's often a real difficult thing to find things that go well in shade. So a couple of plant tips there for you.
What about a third plant, Lottie? Anything in your garden that's new?
Something that's been there a long while and has actually survived the dry and summers is lavender, and it just provides the beautiful smell as well, and then you get the nice dried seeds that you can use at the end of the summer. So definitely stick with lavender.
And then you get the biodiversity, you get the butterflies and bees attracted to lavender, don't you?
Exactly, yes. Yep, get the bees and butterflies and the beautiful smell.
All right, well, let's just walk on round your pond a bit more and have a look at the trees growing by the side of the pond. That's something else people might want advice about, because people do, oh gosh, what a lovely vista of daffodils on the side of the pond. John, trees, any advice? You are a conservation company as well, but people may well have trees that in these gales have lost branches. I know this winter in my garden we've lost a silver birch tree, which is very sad, but any advice to maintain the trees?
Well, trees is a huge challenge for all of us at the moment because we're involved in so much tree planting for Affinity Water and for other clients, and there's also a lot of funding at the moment for woodland creation and tree planting. But the issues we have is finding those right trees, because we've talked about climate change, and so we need to have trees that will go in the ground now and will survive, but also will survive in 30 years, 60 years, 100 years time. The other thing that we face with tree planting, as opposed to just climate change, is pests and diseases. And there's so many issues with trees at the moment. Ash dieback's one that a lot of people know about, and then we've got oak processionary moth affecting oak trees. It makes it very limited. So one of the things that we're starting to do is when we're planting, even though we plant native trees, and natives are always the preference.
Just name a few.
So like oak trees, oak, field maples, beech, and then there's honorary natives like sweet chestnut.
A moo.
Oh, you got some move, fantastic. Well done, well done. Focus on these native trees, but then thinking about cultivars or seed sources that maybe have come further south. So we're starting to look at oak trees that have been originally from Spain, because it might be that they're going to be more adaptable to our climate in a few years' time.
So you are, just an admission there, we are going continental with our gardens.
Yeah, I think so, and with our landscapes as well. We're having to think about it, definitely. But at the same time, we still need to have things that are relevant to our native biodiversity, and will still provide the right food sources for them. So that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, Lottie, any tips on trees?
Trees that might be suitable for gardens as well could include orchard species and fruiting species.
Apples.
Apples, yeah.
Pears.
Pears as well, yes. And trying to find ones that are traditional to your local area is really great, and they will pollinate, have pollen, and pollinating species can make use of those.
And what time of year to plant these? We've got to be careful that it's not the summer when there may be water restrictions, or even if there aren't, when we should be mindful of our use of water in the gardens.
We always say to plant between November and February, just making sure that the ground isn't frozen when you're planting, because that gives the trees the best chance to survive. And then we do need to be watering them to help them become established, because you don't want to waste the trees that you've just bought, but just being very targeted in your watering right at the base of the trees.
Now, Jon, final tips for our gardeners at home in the Affinity Water region. They will be able to hear that the wind is getting up. It's still quite chilly. We've got our coats on. But is it time to get going in the garden, or should we just hold back our enthusiasm in case there's a frost?
Oh, it's a good question. I think there's always time to get going. My garden, certainly, there's always things to be doing, always bits of clearance and cutting back. I tend to leave things a bit longer over winter. I mentioned some of those species that I like. I leave them over winter so they've got time to set seed and things, which often means I'm doing some of the cutting back in this time of year. But I certainly think holding back on any watering at this time of year, there's no need, because we've got so much coming in itself. Huge thunderstorms last night. I think it's thinking about what you're planning for this year. If you're making any changes to the garden, what are the plants you're looking to put in? I mean, one of the things we've seen obviously at the moment is there's a real shortage in salad crops and tomatoes. So what a fantastic time to be thinking about how you could use your garden for that. And then in terms of the planting, obviously you're still wanting to limit that water input. Well, thinking about water butts, thinking about recycling water in your garden, really good way to then manage your salad crops and avoid having to buy them.
Okay, well, Affinity Water, our website, affinitywater.co.uk, it does have water-saving tips for the garden. But you mentioned water butts. And, of course, we can also recycle water from the kitchen and the bathroom. I've got friends who don't pull the plug on their bath, should they have one, or even in their shower tray. Using a shower is preferable to having a bath. You save water and you save energy. But people save their water and they put it on the garden.
They do, certainly. I mean, I do. Having two small children, I have a paddling pool with, but I would never think of just throwing that water away. That all goes on the plants. My benefit of doing a paddling pool is that I can then water my garden. Still probably not the most sustainable use of water, but still, there we go. But absolutely using water butts, thinking about use of grey water, absolutely fantastic. It just feels like such a waste of a valuable resource to be taking it from the tap and throwing it straight on the lawn or on the garden. So I think, yeah, absolutely fully support that.
And Lottie, water butts, how important are they? Because it doesn't take much to fit one, does it?
No, and you can get quite small ones as well, so you don't need as much space as perhaps you used to have one in your garden. Tom was just telling me actually that the moat level drops and they rainwater harvest from the roofs of the barn to keep the moat topped up, so they're not using hoses to fill it back up again.
And do you have water saving tips on your website, John?
We do. Well, we have pages talking about biodiversity and about our approach to that. So yes, absolutely. Have a look at maydencroft.co.uk. There'll definitely be some useful information on there and some useful case studies.
Okay, and with Affinity Water, we have our campaign, Save Our Streams, and we also have water saving tips on our website, affinitywater.co.uk, as I've said. But finally, to put you both on the spot, 3 quick fire questions. Weeds, do you pull them out?
Never. No. Well, selectively.
Weeds, Lottie?
Only the invasive non-native species kinds.
And cutting back, do you go out and cut back and prune your garden before the summer thinking, this hedge needs to look this shape?
Try not to. Fluffy edges are the way forwards, definitely.
Fluffy edges, Lottie?
Yes, especially in bird nesting season, we don't want to be disturbing the birds.
Oh, that's a really good point. We haven't mentioned those. And then biodiversity. You mentioned you had children, John, but this is a tough one for you. Do you really want bees in your garden?
I thought you were going to say, do I really want children? Yes, absolutely. Nothing more exciting than, even to this morning, we were watching a great spotted woodpecker in the garden. Fantastic. Bees, butterflies, couldn't have anything better. And don't care about the stings. It's just too lovely having them there.
Oh, that puts you on the spot, Lottie. Finally, don't care about the stings of bees?
No, I don't think they're too bothered about stinging me, which is good, and I'm quite happy to have them in my garden.
Right, John, Lottie, the cows are now coming into our site and they are mooing.
Yeah, that's it. All you need to do is throw in a farmer and a bucket with some food in and you get some moos.
Well, let's see if they come.
Go boy. Go boy.
I've never known cows to be so quiet.
They're very docile. This is why another thing that's so wonderful about these longhorns and why we have them on public sites is that they're big beasts, but they are very, very docile, very friendly. Even the bull there, you can see in the middle, the stocky chap with the ring in his nose, very docile and friendly. So they're just at the moment moving between fields, and look how well behaved they are.
Yeah, they really are, and silent. Well, John and Lottie from Maydencroft, thank you very much indeed for talking to the Affinity Water podcast series today, out here in Hertfordshire at Hitchin, in your, shall we say, country garden. We won't say English country garden, but I've learnt so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, lovely to speak to you.